We often begin our exploration of the human character by examining its more obvious flaws, the jagged edges of narcissism, the cold calculus of psychopathy, or the turbulent storms of neuroticism. But what if one of the most insidious paths to self-abandonment begins not with a vice, but with a virtue? What if the seed of our own undoing is planted in the fertile soil of what others praise as kindness, as cooperation, as the simple, wonderful quality of being agreeable? Let us consider the world of the young child, a world that is not a democracy, but a benevolent and sometimes not so benevolent dictatorship. In this world, survival is not a matter of assertion, but of connection. The infant's cry, its first and most primal act of communication, is a plea for attachment. Its smile, its coo, its gentle clasp of a finger, these are the tools of bonding, the currency through which it secures love, safety, and sustenance. The entire nervous system of the child is an exquisitely sensitive radar constantly scanning the emotional atmosphere of its environment, asking a single, silent, and desperate question: am I safe? Am I loved? Am I acceptable? For most, this dance of attachment unfolds with a natural rhythm. The caregiver is attuned, responsive, and the child learns a foundational truth. My needs are valid and my authentic self is welcome here. They learn that a frown will be met with concern, a cry with comfort, and a boundary-pushing no with gentle, firm guidance. They're allowed, in essence, to exist in their full spectrum of being. But for some, this primordial dance is stilted. The caregiver, perhaps through their own unresolved trauma, their anxieties, their narcissism, or simply the overwhelming pressures of life, is not a consistent mirror. They are a fractured one. This caregiver may reward only certain expressions. The happy, quiet, convenient child is
showered with affection. The smile is met with a smile. The easy compliance is called goodness. But the frown, the cry, the tantrum, the nascent flicker of an independent will, these are met with something else entirely. They are met with withdrawal, with impatience, with palpable anxiety, or with outright anger. The child's sensitive radar picks up a terrifying signal. A part of me is unacceptable. To show this part of myself is to risk the connection upon which my very life depends. This is not a conscious thought. It is a deep cellular, pre-verbal knowing. It is a lesson etched into the amygdala. And so, a bargain is struck deep in the subterranean chambers of the developing psyche. The unacceptable parts, the anger, the sadness, the messy, inconvenient needs, are packaged away. They are disowned. In their place, a proxy self is cultivated, the perpetually smiling, ever-compliant, endlessly agreeable self. This is not a choice. It is a survival strategy. The child learns to wear a mask of agreeableness, not out of an innate desire for harmony, but as a shield against the terror of abandonment. The niceness is not an expression of inner contentment, but a desperate, anxious performance to appease the giants on whose mercy their world depends. This early, foundational anxiety becomes the architect of a personality. It is the ghost in the machine, the silent puppeteer pulling the strings of every future interaction, whispering the same tired, terrifying mantra: be pleasing, be accommodating, be whatever they need you to be, or you will be alone. This primordial bargain, struck in the crucible of early life, does not simply vanish as we mature. It calcifies. It becomes the very lens through which we perceive the world and our place within it. The anxiety that once screamed, "Will Mommy leave me?" transforms into a more sophisticated, but no less potent, adult anxiety. Do they like me? Do they approve? Am I causing a problem? The stage has grown larger. The actors have changed, but the play remains the same. The individual whose agreeableness is forged in this fire of early anxiety walks into a room not as a sovereign entity, but as a petitioner. Their entire being is oriented outwards, their psychological feelers constantly scanning, assessing, and appeasing. They become hypervigilant to the subtle shifts in another's mood, the slight downturn of a mouth, the clipped tone of a response, the almost imperceptible tensing of a shoulder. To a securely attached individual, these signals might be noted and dismissed, or perhaps met with gentle curiosity. But to the anxiously agreeable, they are sirens of impending doom. They are evidence of their own failure. Each interaction becomes a high-stakes performance review. A request from a colleague is not a request. It is a test of their helpfulness. A differing opinion from a friend is not a point of discussion. It is a threat to the harmony of the relationship. A moment of silence in a conversation is not a natural pause. It is a chasm of disapproval that they must rush to fill. This is an exhausting way to live.
Imagine the immense cognitive and emotional resources consumed by this constant monitoring and self-editing. The mind is never at rest. There is a relentless inner monologue, a frantic censor that scrutinizes every thought, every feeling, every impulse before it is allowed to see the light of day. Should I say that? No, it might sound confrontational, do I we? And to go to that event, I'm tired. But if I say no, they'll be disappointed. Am I angry about what they said? Yes, but showing it will only create conflict. This internal censor does not work to protect the individual's well-being. It works to protect the connection at all costs, even at the cost of the self. The authentic self, with its genuine preferences, its legitimate anger, and its sovereign needs, remains locked away, deemed too risky, too dangerous to let out. The performance of agreeableness becomes an all-consuming task, leaving the individual in a state of chronic low-grade anxiety, a constant hum of tension beneath the placid surface. This is the anxiety of inauthenticity. It is the profound, unsettling feeling of being a stranger in one's own life, a polite and smiling ghost rattling the chains of a self-imposed prison. They are praised for their kindness, celebrated for their cooperative nature, but inside they are withering, starved of the one thing the performance can never provide, the simple, soul-sustaining peace of being unconditionally themselves.
Let us delve deeper into the neurological and physiological reality of this state. The nervous system, after all, is not a poet. It is a pragmatist. It learns from experience and creates patterns for efficiency. The child who learned that authenticity leads to the withdrawal of love develops a conditioned response. The mere inkling of a self-assertive thought or a negative emotion can trigger a cascade of stress hormones. Cortisol and adrenaline flood the system not because of a real external threat, but because of an internal one, the threat of the disowned self emerging. This is why the act of saying no can feel, for the pathologically agreeable person, like an act of genuine, life-threatening danger. Their heart races, their palms sweat, their stomach churns, their body is screaming, "Threat, threat," because in its earliest archives, the assertion of will was indeed a threat to the primary attachment bond. This is not weakness, it is a deeply ingrained survival mechanism that has outlived its usefulness. It is a fire alarm blaring in a house where there is no fire, but the body does not know the difference. The constant suppression of this authentic self is a form of chronic stress. It is a low-grade, unending war waged against one's own inner world. Every yes that should have been a no, every swallowed feeling of resentment, every feigned agreement adds another layer of physiological burden. This can manifest in a myriad of somatic symptoms: chronic fatigue, because the performance is utterly draining; irritable bowel syndrome, as the gut recoils from the constant tension; tension headaches and migraines, as the body holds the stress in its very fibers; a compromised immune system worn down by the ceaseless production of stress hormones. We often see the agreeable person as a beacon of calm, but their internal landscape is a tempest. Their placid exterior
Or is maintained at a tremendous biological cost. Furthermore, this anxiety-driven agreeableness fundamentally cripples our ability to learn and grow from interpersonal conflict. Healthy conflict is a necessary component of any deep and meaningful relationship. It is the process through which we negotiate boundaries, repair ruptures, and come to a deeper understanding of one another. It is a sign of trust that a relationship can withstand the friction of two separate sovereign wills. But for the anxiously agreeable, conflict is the ultimate danger zone. It is the reenactment of the original trauma of disapproval. Therefore, it is avoided at all costs. Issues are not resolved, they are buried. Resentments are not aired, they are composted, turning into a toxic sludge that poisons the relationship from within. The individual never learns that they can survive disagreement, that their relationships are not so fragile as to shatter at the first sign of discord, and that their own perspective has value even when it is not shared. They are trapped in a developmental stasis, forever the child seeking approval, unable to graduate to the status of an adult who can stand their ground with both strength and grace. The origin of this agreeableness, then, is not a simple choice to be kind. It is a complex, traumatic adaptation to an environment that made authenticity feel like a death sentence. As this pattern solidifies, it begins to manifest in ways that are both subtle and devastatingly profound, weaving itself into the very fabric of an individual's identity. One of the most common manifestations is a pervasive and bewildering indecisiveness. We are not speaking of the ordinary difficulty of choosing between two good options, but a paralytic inability to connect with one's own preference. Ask the chronically agreeable person where they want to go for dinner, and you will likely be met with, "I don't mind, whatever you want is fine."
Ask them what movie they'd like to see, and the answer will be a gentle deflection. I'm happy with anything. This is often mistaken for flexibility or an easygoing nature. But if we were to place this individual under a psychological microscope, we would see something far more troubling. The question, "What do you want?" is not heard as an invitation, but as a threat. It is a spotlight that sends them scrambling, for they have long ago lost touch with the internal compass of desire. The very act of wanting something feels selfish, demanding, and fraught with the potential for disapproval. What if they choose a restaurant the other person secretly dislikes? What if their choice is seen as unsophisticated or foolish? The risk of making the wrong choice, wrong not in any objective sense, but wrong in the sense that it might displease the other, is so great that it is safer to have no preference at all. They become a perfect mirror, reflecting back the desires of those around them. This creates a strange, hollowed-out existence. Life, after all, is a series of choices, and it is through these choices that we sculpt our identity. The music we listen to, the books we read, the career we pursue, the way we spend our precious fleeting moments, these are the brushstrokes that paint the portrait of a life. But for the agreeable perso, on the canvas remains unnervingly blank. They may find themselves in a career chosen to please a parent, in a relationship chosen out of fear of being alone, living a life that is a patchwork of other people's expectations. A deep, gnawing sense of emptiness and unreality often follows. They feel like a passenger in their own car, a spectator at their own movie. They may look at their life and see all the external markers of success and happiness, yet feel a profound and inexplicable sense of alienation. This is the fading of the self. The mask of harmony, worn for so long, has begun to fuse with the skin. The authentic self, so consistently ignored and suppressed, has grown quiet. Its voice, once a clear signal, is now a faint whisper, drowned out by the cacophony of others' needs and desires. The individual is left with a terrible paradox. They have bent themselves into a pretzel to be loved, yet they feel fundamentally unknown, because the person being loved is not really them. Another insidious manifestation of this trait is the unconscious cultivation of resentment, a poison that brews in the darkness of unspoken truths. The agreeable person on the surface is a fountain of generosity and help. They are the first to volunteer, the last to leave the office, the one who always says yes to a favor, no matter how inconvenient. To the outside world, they are saints, pillars of support. But within their own psyche, a very different accounting is taking place. Every act of service that comes from a place of obligation rather than genuine desire, every no problem that masks a deep inconvenience, is a small withdrawal from a finite bank of emotional energy. And because the agreeable person is incapable of setting the boundaries that would protect this account, it is perpetually overdrawn. This deficit does not simply disappear, it transforms. It curdles into a potent, subterranean resentment. It is a quiet, simmering anger that they themselves can barely acknowledge, for anger is one of the most strictly forbidden emotions in their internal rulebook. So it seeps out in other ways, in passive-aggressive behaviors that feel utterly alien to their conscious sense of self. It might manifest as a forgotten task for a spouse after agreeing to too many chores. It might be the subtle, cutting remark disguised as a joke, which leaves everyone, including the speaker, feeling vaguely uncomfortable. It could be chronic lateness, a nonverbal way of reclaiming time that was given away too freely. It might even manifest as a kind of malicious compliance, where they perform a requested task to the letter of the law, but with a sullen, joyless energy that punishes the requester. These behaviors are the ghosts of the murdered nose. They are the desperate, distorted cries of a self that is being systematically erased. The individual often feels immense GUIs,
Lot and confusion about these feelings. Why do I feel so angry at this person I love? They only asked for a small favor. I should be happy to help. There must be something wrong with me. They fail to see that their resentment is not a sign of their own moral failing, but a healthy, albeit distorted, signal from their psyche. It is a distress flare from the authentic self, indicating that its boundaries have been grievously breached. This internal state is a breeding ground for a profound sense of victimization. The agreeable person begins to see the world as a place filled with demanding, selfish people who are constantly taking advantage of them. They feel perpetually put upon and unappreciated. And in a tragic irony, their own behavior, their inability to set limits, is what creates and perpetuates this very dynamic. They silently train people on how to treat them. By never saying no, they teach others that their energy is limitless. By never expressing a need, they teach others that they have none. They build their own gilded cage of servitude and then resent the world for failing to see the bars. The performance of agreeableness ultimately leads to a catastrophic failure in the realm of intimacy. True intimacy is not built on perpetual harmony. It is built on the foundation of two whole separate selves choosing to come together to share their authentic inner worlds, the beautiful, the ugly, the light, and the shadow. It requires vulnerability, the courage to show up and be seen as you truly are. It is the trust that you can reveal your deepest fears, your most shameful secrets, your most inconvenient needs, and still be held in loving regard. For the individual trapped in the mask of harmony, this level of intimacy is terrifyingly impossible. Their primary relational strategy is not revelation, but concealment. They become emotional chameleons, masterfully adapting their personality to match what they perceive their partner wants them to be. In the early stages of a relationship, this can seem like a magical connection. They are so in tune, so accommodating, so perfectly aligned with their partner's desires. The partner feels deeply seen and understood because the agreeable person is a flawless mirror. But a mirror has no substance of its own. It only reflects. As the relationship deepens and life inevitably presents challenges, the cracks in this facade begin to show. The partner may begin to feel a strange sense of loneliness, an inability to truly connect with the person behind the pleasing veneer. They might say, "I feel like I don't really know you." And this is the honest truth. How could they? The agreeable person has never shown them their true self. When conflicts arise, as they must, the agreeable person's system goes into red alert. They will do anything to avoid the confrontation, apologize for things that are not their fault, concede points they do not believe, abandon their own needs before they are even spoken. They will absorb blame, acceptance as snart as fairness, and placate at all costs to restore a semblance of peace. But this is not peace. It is the silence of subjugation. This dynamic prevents the relationship from ever developing a true resilience. It cannot weather storms because one of the sailors is constantly throwing their own life vest overboard to calm the waters. Over time, this creates one of two tragic outcomes. In the first, the partner, often unknowingly, becomes a tyrant, their own needs expanding to fill the vacuum left by the agreeable person's absent self. The relationship becomes a lopsided arrangement of taker and giver. In the second, the partner becomes exhausted by the lack of authentic engagement, the feeling of walking on eggshells, the sense that they are interacting with a carefully constructed persona. They may leave not out of malice, but out of a desperate need for a real two-way connection. The agreeable person is then left with a devastating confirmation of their deepest fear. When I am truly seen, I will be abandoned. But the tragedy is that they were never truly seen at all. They were abandoned because they first abandoned themselves. Beneath the anxiety-fueled performance and the hollowing out of the self lies a deeper, more corrosive emotion: shame. While guilt is the feeling of having done something bad, shame is the feeling of being something bad. It is a visceral, deeply painful sense of being flawed, unworthy, and fundamentally unlovable. For the person caught in the web of pathological agreeableness, shame is the silent, humming engine that powers the entire machine. It is the unseen architect of their internal prison. This shame did not begin with a specific event, but was woven into the very fabric of their being during those crucial early interactions. When the child's authentic expressions of need, anger, or sadness were met with disapproval or withdrawal, the implicit message was not just, "Your behavior is wrong," but "Your feelings are wrong, your needs are wrong, the core of who you are is a problem." The child internalizes this message and comes to believe that there is something inherently broken within them. This core shame becomes a source of profound psychic pain, and the entire personality structure of agreeableness is an elaborate, lifelong defense mechanism designed to manage and conceal it. The constant seeking of external validation is not merely a desire for praise. It is a desperate attempt to find evidence that contradicts the deep internal belief of their own worthlessness. Every thank you, every compliment, every sign of approval is a temporary balm on the wound of shame. It is a fleeting moment of relief, a brief reprieve from the gnawing sense that they are a fraud who will eventually be found out. This is why they are so addicted to pleasing others. The applause, the approval, the "what would we do without you?" It is their medicine, but it is a medicine that offers no cure, only a momentary numbing of the symptoms. The moment the external validation disappears, the shame rushes back in to fill the void, often with a vengeance. This creates a terrifying dependency on others. Their sense of self-worth is not an internal stable structure, but something that must be constantly rebuilt from the outside, day after day, interaction by interaction. It is an exhausting Sisyphean task. They are only as good as their last helpful act, only as worthy as their most recent compliment. The absence of praise is interpreted not as neutrality, but as confirmation of their worthlessness. This is why criticism, even gentle, constructive feedback, can feel absolutely catastrophic. It pierces through the fragile defenses and strikes directly at the heart of their core shame, confirming their deepest fear. I am, and always have been, fundamentally flawed. The emotional reaction is often wildly disproportionate to the event itself, leaving the other person bewildered because they do not understand that they have not just criticized a behavior, they have reactivated a deep, primordial wound. The architecture of shame dictates a life lived in hiding. The agreeable individual becomes a master of camouflage, their primary goal being to never, ever expose the defective self that they believe lurks within. This leads to a profound fear of visibility and a resistance to taking up space in the world. They might be brilliant, talented, and insightful, but they will often shy away from the spotlight. They will downplay their accomplishments, deflecting praise with phrases like, "Oh, it was nothing," or "anyone could have done it." This is not humility, it is fear. To accept praise fully would be to accept a positive evaluation of themselves that feels dangerously incongruent with their internal sense of shame. It feels like a lie, and they live in terror of being exposed as an imposter. They believe that if people knew what they were really like, needy, angry, selfish, as their natural human impulses have been defined, they would be horrified and disgusted. So they keep themselves small. In meetings, they will have a brilliant idea but remain silent, fearing that it might be foolish or that speaking up would be too assertive. They will allow others to take credit for their work, as the discomfort of claiming ownership is greater than the pain of being overlooked. In their relationships, they will never articulate their deepest needs, because to have needs is to be a burden, which is a shameful state of being. This self-diminishing behavior creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. By consistently hiding their light, they teach the world to overlook them. They are passed over for promotions, their contributions are ignored, and their needs are unmet, all of which reinforces the internal belief that they are indeed unworthy and insignificant. The shame also creates a powerful and distorted internal critic. This critic is the internalized voice of the disapproving Carnegie. Ivor, a relentless prosecutor who provides a running commentary on all their thoughts, feelings, and actions. It is a voice of merciless judgment, constantly on the lookout for any evidence of the shameful self. If they feel a flash of anger, the critic sneers, "See how nasty you are?" If they feel tired and want to rest, the critic chides, "You are so lazy and selfish." If they make a small mistake, the critic screams, "You are a complete and utter failure." Living with this internal critic is like living with an abuser in your own head. It erodes any possibility of self-compassion or peace. The agreeable person is often seen by others as incredibly kind and forgiving, yet they offer themselves not a shred of the grace they so freely give away. They are trapped in a courtroom where they are the defendant, the prosecutor, and the judge, and the verdict is always, inevitably, guilty. The sentence is a life of compulsive service, a penance paid for the unforgivable crime of being human. The relationship between shame and agreeableness fosters a peculiar and painful form of perfectionism. It is not the healthy striving for excellence that motivates us to learn and grow. It is a desperate, fear-driven perfectionism aimed at creating a flawless, impenetrable facade that will hide the shameful self from view. The logic is simple and brutal. If I am perfect, I cannot be criticized. If I am not criticized, my shame will not be triggered. They must be the perfect employee, the perfect parent, the perfect friend, the perfect child. Every project must be flawless, every interaction smooth, every decision faultless. The pressure they place on themselves is immense and unrelenting. Procrastination becomes a common side effect of this perfectionism, which seems paradoxical but makes perfect sense. The fear of producing anything less than a perfect result is so great that it becomes paralyzing. It is safer to not start the task at all than to risk producing something that might be judged and found wanting. When they do complete a task, they are often unable to feel any sense of satisfaction or pride. Their focus immediately shifts to the one tiny flaw they can find, the one small way in which it fell short of perfection. They live in a state of perpetual dissatisfaction with themselves, always falling short of the impossible standards set by their internal critic. This shame-driven perfectionism also makes them incredibly vulnerable to exploitation. A manager, a partner, or a friend who senses this desperate need for approval can easily manipulate it. By strategically withholding praise or offering targeted criticism, they can keep the agreeable person in a constant state of striving, always working harder and harder to earn the validation that will quiet their shame. The agreeable person becomes an easy target for narcissists who see in them a perfect source of supply. Someone who will cater to their every need, absorb their blame, and never demand anything in return. The agreeable person enters this dynamic believing that their service and self-sacrifice will eventually earn them the love and security they crave. They do not realize that they are feeding an insatiable hunger and that their role in the dynamic is not to be loved, but to be used. The shame at their core makes them believe that this is the best they can hope for. They believe they do not deserve a reciprocal, respectful relationship. They accept the crumbs of affection because deep down they feel they do not deserve the whole loaf. This is the ultimate tragedy of shame. It convinces the prisoner that they not only belong in the cell, but that they are not worthy of the world outside its walls. It transforms an external system of control into a brutally efficient, self-policing internal regime. When we speak of bondage, we often conjure images of physical restraints, of prisons with iron bars. But some of the most inescapable prisons are not made of steel. They are woven from the invisible threads of emotion, obligation, and fear. The chronically agreeable individual lives within such a prison, a gilded cage of their own making. The bars of this cage are forged from the shoulds, oughts, and musts that dictate their every move. The gold plating is the praise and approval they receive for their servitude, the very thing that makes the cage so deceptively beautiful and so difficult to leave. This state of emotional bondage is most clearly seen in their interpersonal relationships, which cease to be a source of nourishment and become a landscape of obligation. They do not relate to others as a sovereign self connecting with another. They relate as a subordinate to a superior. Every person in their life, a parent, a spouse, a friend, a boss, becomes a potential source of judgment and a figure to be managed and appeased. They are not free to simply be in the relationship. They are perpetually working. They are working to maintain the peace, working to manage the other person's emotions, working to anticipate their needs, working to earn their continued affection. This is not relating. It is a form of emotional labor, and it is utterly exhausting. The dynamic is one of entanglement, not connection. True connection requires boundaries. It requires two separate people with distinct identities. Entanglement or enmeshment is a state where boundaries are blurred and identities are fused. The agreeable person, having disowned their own needs and feelings, becomes a psychic extension of the other. They feel responsible for the other person's happiness. If their partner is sad, they feel it as their failure to be cheerful enough. If their friend is angry, they feel it as their failure to be accommodating enough. They absorb the emotional states of those around them like a sponge, unable to differentiate between I am feeling my feelings and I am feeling their feelings. This creates a profound and terrifying codependency. They need the other person for their sense of worth, and they believe the other person needs them for their emotional regulation. They are trapped in a dance where they are constantly propping up the other person, believing that if they stop, the other will collapse, and more terrifyingly, will withdraw their love, leaving the agreeable person to face their own inner void. This is the gilded cage. It appears to be a relationship of incredible devotion and care, but it is, in fact, a hostage situation where the agreeable person is both the hostage and unwittingly one of the guards. Breaking free from this gilded cage is so difficult because the very act of self-assertion is interpreted by the agreeable person's psyche as an act of catastrophic aggression. Imagine a person who has spent their entire life in a small, dimly lit room. The thought of stepping outside into the bright sunlight is not just appealing, it is also terrifying. The light would be blinding, the open space disorienting. Similarly, the thought of setting a boundary, of saying no, of stating a need, feels like an act of relational violence. They have equated harmony with love for so long that any form of discord, which is what a boundary feels like, is perceived as a withdrawal of love, an act of pure selfishness. They have a deeply ingrained belief that their needs are inherently burdensome to others. This belief is not conscious, it is a deep emotional conviction. When they contemplate asking for something, their mind is flooded with a litany of fears. They will think I am selfish. They will be annoyed. It will inconvenience them. They will say yes, but they will resent me for it. It is better to just not ask. So they remain silent, their needs unmet, their desires unspoken. They starve themselves emotionally while providing a feast for everyone around them. This creates a deeply imbalanced and unsustainable dynamic. The agreeable person is constantly giving, pouring their energy, time, and resources into others, while receiving little genuine nourishment in return. They may receive gratitude, they may receive praise, but they do not receive the authentic care that comes from being truly known and loved for who they are, needs and all. This imbalance inevitably leads to burnout and a profound secret bitterness.
They may start to fantasize about escape, about quitting the job, ending the relationship, moving to a new city where no one knows them and no one has any expectations.
These fantasies are a cry for freedom from the emotional bondage they are in, but they rarely act on them because the guilt associated with abandoning their obligations is too overwhelming to bear. They are chained by what we might call pathological empathy. They feel the potential disappointment or hurt of the other person so acutely, often more acutely than they feel their own suffering, that they are paralyzed. They would rather endure the slow, quiet agony of self-negation than risk causing a moment of discomfort to someone else. This is the tragic paradox of their condition. In their effort to be the ultimate caregiver, they become the ultimate self-abuser, trapped in a cycle of service and resentment, unable to see that the door to the cage is, and always has been, unlocked. All they have to do is turn the handle, but they believe the handle is made of fire.
The architecture of this emotional bondage is reinforced by the social and cultural narratives that celebrate self-sacrifice, particularly in certain roles.
We praise the selfless mother, the loyal employee, the ride-or-die friend. We are taught that to be good is to put others first. And while there is immense value in altruism and community, these narratives can become toxic when they are not balanced with an equal validation of self-respect and healthy boundaries. The agreeable person clings to these narratives as justification for their own self-abandonment. They frame their inability to say no not as a fear-based trauma response, but as a moral virtue. They are not afraid of conflict. They are a peacemaker. They are not unable to state their needs. They are low maintenance. They are not being taken advantage of. They are a giving person. This reframing allows them to maintain the structure of their personality without having to face the terrifying shame and anxiety that lie beneath it. It allows them to feel noble in their suffering. The people around them often unwittingly collude in this deception. Why wouldn't they? The agreeable person is incredibly convenient to have around. They make life easier for everyone else. So when the agreeable person does show a flicker of self-assertion, perhaps by finally saying no to an unreasonable request, the reaction from their environment can be swift and punishing. They are suddenly accused of being selfish, difficult, or not a team player. They are met with guilt-tripping and emotional manipulation designed to pull them back into their familiar, compliant role. This backlash serves as a powerful confirmation of their deepest fears. See? The moment I try to stand up for myself, I am punished. I am unlovable. It is safer to just go back to being pleasing. This is why change is so extraordinarily difficult. It requires not only a monumental internal shift, but also a willingness to weather a potentially massive relational storm. It requires them to grieve the loss of their identity as the good, helpful, easy one. It requires them to endure being misunderstood, to be seen as selfish by the very people they have spent their lives serving. It is, in essence, a hero's journey, but one where the dragon to be slain is not just an internal demon, but the entire system of relationships they have built around their compliance. They must be willing to risk everything, the approval, the harmony, the very identity they have so carefully constructed, for the chance to find something they may not even believe exists, a self that is worthy of love, not for what it does for others, but simply for what it is. So we arrive at the heart of the matter in the quiet, desolate chamber of the self that has been so long abandoned. What does it feel like to inhabit this inner world? It is a landscape of echoes and voids. The echo is the relentless internal critic, the replaying of every past mistake, the constant whisper of inadequacy. The void is the absence of a core, the lack of a felt sense of self. To move towards healing, towards authenticity, is not a matter of learning new techniques or adopting a more assertive communication style. These are surface-level fixes for a problem that runs to the very bedrock of one's being. The journey is not one of addition, but of excavation. It is the slow, often painful process of digging through the rubble of a lifetime of self-abandonment to find the buried self beneath. This process must often begin with the acknowledgement of a profound and terrifying grief. It is the grief for the life not lived, the choices not made, the words not spoken. It is the grief for the child who had to contort themselves into a pleasing shape to feel safe. It is the grief for the adolescent who silenced their own voice to fit in, and for the adult who perpetuated that silence out of fear. We must allow ourselves to mourn the parts of ourselves we had to sacrifice.
This grief is not a sign of self-pity. It is an act of profound self-compassion. It is the first acknowledgement that a wound was inflicted, that something precious was lost. It is in the safe holding of this grief that the first flickers of anger can begin to emerge. Not the sour, passive-aggressive resentment that has been seeping out for years, but a clean, righteous anger. It is the anger at the injustice of what happened. It is the anger at the environment that demanded such a sacrifice. It is the anger at the self for its own complicity in its subjugation. This anger is not a destructive for...
It is a life-giving one. It is pure energy. It is the psychic fuel required to begin pushing back against the old patterns. It is the no that finally rises up from the depths, clear and strong. It is the voice that says, my needs matter, my feelings are valid, my existence is not an inconvenience. Learning to listen to this anger, to honor it without fear, is a revolutionary act for the agreeable person. It is the sound of the authentic self beginning to stir from its long slumber. This is not a journey of becoming someone new. It is the journey of unbecoming everything that isn't you. It is the shedding of the masks, the dismantling of the cage, the challenging of the shame-based beliefs that have governed one's life. It involves learning to sit with the profound discomfort of disappointing others. Each time a boundary is set, the old anxiety will scream, the old guilt will surge. The work is to learn to tolerate these feelings without immediately reverting to the old compliant behavior. It is to learn that these feelings are just echoes from the past, ghosts that have no real power over the present unless we give it to them. It is to discover, through terrifying and liberating experience, that one can disappoint someone and survive, that one can be disapproved of and the world does not end, that the relationship which cannot survive your authenticity was not a relationship worth keeping in the first place. This is the slow, arduous process of building an internal locus of control, of moving the source of one's worth from the shifting sands of others' opinions to the solid ground of one's own being. It is learning to say to oneself, my opinion of me is more important than their opinion of me. Ultimately, the path out of the darkness of agreeableness is the path of radical self-acceptance. This is not a passive resignation, but an active, courageous embrace of the totality of who we are. It is the willingness to own our light and our shadow, our strengths and our weaknesses, our good feelings and our bad ones. It means accepting that it is okay to be angry, to be sad, to be needy, to be tired, to be imperfect. It is the understanding that these are not character flaws to be hidden in shame. They are simply a part of the rich, messy, beautiful tapestry of being human. This journey requires us to cultivate a new inner voice, one that can stand against the harsh tones of the internal critic. This is the voice of the compassionate witness, the good enough parent we never had. When the critic screams, "You are a failure," this new voice whispers, "You are learning, you are trying, you are human." When the shame surges, this voice says, "You are worthy of love and belonging exactly as you are right now." This is not an easy voice to cultivate. It must be practiced consciously and deliberately, moment by moment. It is built through acts of self-care that go beyond bubble baths and massages. It is the self-care of saying no. It is the self-care of allowing oneself to rest. It is the self-care of speaking one's truth, even when one's voice shakes. It is the self-care of choosing oneself over and over again. As the authentic self grows stronger, a strange and wonderful thing begins to happen. The frantic need for external validation begins to quiet. The world outside becomes less of a courtroom and more of a playground. Relationships transform from a source of anxiety into a source of genuine connection. Freed from the burden of performance, the individual can finally show up as they are. They discover that true intimacy is not about being perfectly pleasing, but about being imperfectly real. They find that the people who are meant to be in their life will love them more, not less, for their authenticity. Their kindness, when it emerges, is no longer a compulsive, anxious performance, but a genuine expression of a self that is full, not empty. It comes from a place of surplus, not of deficit. This is the ultimate paradox. By learning to prioritize themselves, by embracing their own needs and boundaries, they become capable of a far deeper and more meaningful form of generosity and love. They do not escape the darkness by running from it, but by walking through it, by sitting with it, by understanding its origins and its purpose. They realize that the dark side of their agreeableness was never a flaw, but a scar. And a scar is not a sign of weakness, but a sign that a deep wound has at last begun to heal,
We have journeyed tonight into a shadow that masquerades as light. We have seen how a celebrated virtue can become a gilded cage, how the pursuit of being liked can lead to the desolation of being unknown. The questions we are left with are not simple. Where in our own lives do we wear the mask of harmony? What unspoken resentments do we carry? What authentic self have we disowned out of fear? There are no easy answers here. The work of knowing oneself is the work of a lifetime. But the willingness to ask the questions, to sit with the discomfort, to simply witness the truth of our own inner world without judgment, that is the beginning of everything. That is where the light gets in. Thank you for joining us at the Modern Psyche.